Let's bring Nigel Farage into the conversation. Reform UK President and GB News presenter. Nigel, you're in Paddington. Thanks for joining me this morning. Can we just nail down what happened last week? Because my intel, for what it's worth, was that you were going to make this grand announcement on May the 30th that you were going to stand. My suspicion is that you were going to run for Clacton because the polling suggests you're a good 10% there, ahead there. And then I feel that Reform and indeed Reform supporters have been quite blindsided by your decision then to say no, that you're not going to stand. And I can't quite work out what difference the timing makes. I appreciate you'd be squeezed, but you're either running for Reform or you're not, regardless of whether it's a 6-week campaign or a 6-month campaign.
It's very interesting. Journalists who write about elections, talk about elections, in my experience, have never, ever fought elections. And that's why very often what you read in the newspapers is rubbish. I had a plan to say, right, I'm going to give this 6 months, a 6-month campaign up to an October or November general election. That would have been enough time to work in a constituency and to go around the country, to visit other places and to do media. And I'll admit, I was extremely disappointed last week. I really was very, very down indeed that I'd lost perhaps first mover advantage, that there was very little time. And I realised very quickly I couldn't do both. I mean, I would not be talking to you now. I would not be going to Dover on Tuesday, to Ashfield on Saturday, to Boston and Skegness on Friday. I simply couldn't do both. I could. But
you didn't need 6 months because you're so recognisable. Everyone knows who you are. You would have been ahead in a seat like Clacton. You don't need to do the grand tour for 6 months. You're Nigel Farage.
Again, if you've ever fought an election, you'll know that what it comes down to is data, and particularly now, in the last 20 years, since we've had postal voting. A place like Clacton, Labour and Conservatives, or Boston and Skegness, or any of the other seats, Thanet, wherever I'd chosen to stand, they've been knocking on doors there for 100 years. They have a massive data about their loyal voters, about their possible voters. They're able, when the postal votes go out 2 weeks before the election, to go and visit those doors where they know people are inclined their way. If you walk in with zero intel, you've got a very, very major problem.
But look, and I understand that you're an individual, you've got a private life, you've got other concerns apart from your life as a political campaigner. And also, I don't take away from you at all what you have achieved in your political career, right, over the course of recent decades. However, there is a central contradiction at the heart of this decision, and it's this. You have been banging on for years about how terrible the Conservatives are, that the right needs to be united, that the country's going to hell in a handcart. You're man of the people, and you've basically turned around and said, but, at the end of the day, America's bigger than little England, therefore I'm going to go and help Trump. So you're saying England and the UK is going to hell in a handcart, but actually I'm off.
Right. First things first, by choosing the path I have for the next 6 weeks, I'll be speaking to millions of people. If I decided now I'm going to go for a constituency, I'd have been speaking to about 80,000. All right? So, is the argument going to be out there? And by the way, isn't it the dullest election campaign you've ever seen in your life?
Well, that's why you should have been in it.
No, I am in it. I couldn't have been in it and fought a constituency. That is the point. I couldn't do both. It's literally impossible when you start with zero data. It can't be done. So I'm going to be part of the national debate. You bet your life. On economics, you can't put a cigarette paper between these two parties, at least in terms of what they're telling the electorate. On the big subject of the massive population explosion, the impact that it's had on your ability to get a house, a GP appointment, there'll be no proper debate. And even on the farcical Rwanda plan, well, as members of ECHR, that's never going to happen anyway. So I want to be part of those debates. After this election is over, yes, I will be spending time in America. Why does it matter? It matters because we are closer to global conflict than we've been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis of over 60 years ago. And a strong America as a genuine deterrent for our safety is absolutely vital.
I'm familiar with your statement, so I understand that argument. But the central point here
Do you agree with the argument?
I agree with the argument
Good.
that we need to be worried about security.
Good.
I think you're taking an enormous gamble because you've got no guarantee that Donald Trump is going to win the US election. But bringing it back to home matters, you've handed an extraordinary electoral advantage to Rishi Sunak, the man you've been spending recent months and years criticising, point one. And point two, I know because I've spoken to Telegraph readers about this, they're now not going to vote for reform because you're not at the helm of it. So you have sacrificed reform votes.
OK.
Lee Anderson said to you should have manned up, apparently. Did he say that in the week? Man up?
No.
Because there's this sense that you've been there for training, you've been there, you're going to be the key striker, you're the Lionel Messi of reform, and then when the game days come, you said, no, sorry, I've got an ankle injury.
I tell you what I could do. I could change my mind this morning, move down to Kent, fight a seat, all right, and you won't see or hear of me for the rest of the election campaign.
Of course we would see and hear of you.
How?
You'd be seen and heard on GB News. You've got an extraordinary social media following.
The point
You've got
is
millions on Twitter and TikTok, you're always telling me.
No. I can do all those things, but I can't do that and focus on a constituency. That's the point. 6 weeks made it very, very difficult. Impossible to do both, difficult to fight a seat. I've chosen I want to be part of the national debate, not just in a constituency, and I will be there. And believe you me, I'm going to do my best to expose some of the absolute nonsenses that are being discussed over immigration and economics. They are absolutely top of my list.
All right, let's talk about one policy, because I note that you advocated bringing back national service in 2023. You said it would be a very good idea. So presumably you're in support of this Tory announcement today, Nigel.
A good idea, but impossible. And you know why? Because the army has shrunk from 100,000 to 75,000. The army itself has a massive recruitment problem. National service on any scale is literally impossible unless you build up the size of the army, and you need another 20,000 people to be trainers if you were doing it seriously. We now learn from James Cleverly that only 30,000 people out of 700,000 school leavers would be doing military service, which shows you what a joke it is. The only reason they're doing this is because they've had a focus group, and the focus group of potential reform voters have said they think national service would be a good idea. Well, I tell you what, that is what followership is as opposed to leadership. Everyone knows he doesn't mean it. Everyone knows he'd never, ever implement it. And we've had 14 years of this. 14 years of lying to the electorate, pretending you're Conservative, and then doing the opposite in government. Well, this time it doesn't matter. The Labour lead is massive. The Conservative start to the campaign has been catastrophic. The election is over in terms of who forms the next government. It's done.
Well, not necessarily. What if, as the local election picture is translated to nationals,
No.
albeit without Scotland, that actually Labour in a position, I mean, it could be worse for you than forecast. We could be in a situation where Labour needs to rely on the SNP and Lib Dems for some kind of left-wing confidence and supply situation.
Look, the extrapolation of the local election results was ridiculous because of the geographical location of those local elections, which were much more in the Conservatives' favour than Labour's. So, look, it's a 25-point lead. Even if the lead narrowed, it's still going to be a big Labour majority. But I've got a feeling, just looking at the last 2 or 3 days, I've got a feeling the Conservative vote actually could collapse from here. I think there is a risk of disintegration of the entire Conservative campaign. Yeah. And that's where people will say, you know what? A vote for reform matters. It matters not just to send a message, but it matters because of this. The Conservatives will be in opposition, but they won't be the opposition. It's impossible. They hate each other. They disagree on virtually everything. They don't have a unified stance on any major national policy. So what the country needs is a voice of opposition.
Okay.
And if what I can do is to help the party get millions of votes by being out and about all over the country, appearing in debates, national media, big TV programmes, radio, etc. If I can do that, and we can get a cluster of Reform UK MPs in the Commons, then we will be the opposition.
All right, but final question then. Is the plan to hold off riding back to the Reform rescue, to take the helm after we've witnessed what you're predicting, which is electoral annihilation for the Tories, the right in a mess, maybe in 1, 2, 3 years' time you come back into the fray?
I've always reasoned age 60. that I've got one more big card to play, personally, in terms of putting myself forward as a candidate. The question is when to play it. I had decided I'd do it this year. And I thought I'd have 6 months of it. I didn't. I had 6 weeks. Will I, at some point in the future, come back to try and reshape, to actually create a centre-right of British politics? Because there isn't one. The Conservatives have been high tax, big state, mass immigration. They've not even been vaguely right of centre. At some point in the future, I'll do what I can now for the next 6 weeks. I think we're going to surprise people with how many votes we get. I genuinely do. But at some point in the future, the answer to your question is yes.